Welcome, my Omnusians. As always, I am your Game Master at Large OmnusI, here in my lair. I am here once more to answer a question posed by the RPG Brigade of Facebook in their RPG A Day challenge. Today being the 16th, it is time for the 16th question. And that is, describe your plans for your next game. Now, there are some people who run role-playing games, and every session, every game is devoted to a single game. There are people who have been playing on these campaigns with the same characters or the same group of players for decades. I have heard tell of a game that's been going on for over 30 years, with some interruptions here and there, but the same players for the most part, mastered by the same person. And that's fine. That's good. However, in my mind, that's a little bit like going to the ice cream store. Ice cream is wonderful. It's delicious. But if you always have vanilla, vanilla is wonderful. It is delicious. So much that you can do with it. It's a wonderful palate to rest other things on, and sometimes by itself it's refreshing. But if all you ever have is vanilla, you're missing out on a lot of things. Now, I do not have every single game that's out there, certainly, much as I wish I had. I simply don't have room nor the resources to gather such a collection, which would be truly staggering. Especially now, with all of the mini games that are created not only in the United States, but all over the world, many of them available for digital distribution or print on demand so that you can build your own library up as you... It's an amazing time. And also, with eBay and other sites, some of those long discontinued games are being made available through secondhand market or from dusty warehouses where they've been stored for 20 years. Whatever quality that ends up being. So, I am not the kind of person who will run a game forever and ever and ever and ever. I'm just not interested in that. I want to see character development. I want to see my players evolve, certainly. And my campaigns are not short. Many of them run for 2 years or 3 years in a row. That's pretty good standards. I'd say I'm above the average, certainly. Considering how many people never finish theirs or stick to running one-shots or short adventures. But that's just the style. With 2 or 3 years, you get enough to know a character very well. You get to be able to act as that character. You get to see their defining moments. But eventually, all great stories have an ending. And I like to reward a great story with a denouement at the end, where the players can find out what happens to their characters after the adventure's been done. Maybe, have children, or raise a nation of their own, or found an academy, or, some such. A little reward for the players for all their hard work over the course of a campaign story. But, as I said, they all end. In my games, that end comes and a new one begins. My players don't step up very often to run games. I am generally the prime storyteller of the group. I run the games because of my familiarity, my library of games, and I'm the one who has the interest. I have all the stories that I want to tell. And that is quite a privilege that my players continue to keep coming back and want to hear these stories. They want to be a part of them, and eternally flattered by that. I do not ever take them for granted, even when they drive me crazy sometimes. But I digress. What are my plans for what's coming up next? Well, I've got 2 campaigns running right now. I run games on opposite weeks, so on Thursday nights, when we're here for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, in the campaign storyline of the Princes of the Apocalypse, which was published by Wizards of the Coast. I tweaked a few things here and there, changed a few things, and so enough to scratch the serial numbers off of it so the players are kept guessing at what's going on, but kept enough things in that it's not the campaign that I've worked the hardest at. I'm enjoying playing the 5th edition without doing as much work as I usually do, building my own campaign worlds from scratch, as I'm prone to do. So they are running through that, and right now the characters are all 7th level, heading up to 8th. And, you know, it's about midway through the storyline, honestly. Then, on the opposite weeks, I am running a Warhammer 40,000 game set in the Dark Heresy rule set, and I've taken a different path on that, where my players are playing as basically, if you've ever heard of Judge Dredd, that's kind of their role in society. They are the arbitrators of the Imperium, and that means that they are above the law themselves, because they are the law. So if that means there's a block war and they break out the heavy machine guns to deal with it, that's perfectly fine for them. However, their characters are quite moral and actually somewhat agonized when they have to, you know, prove the grimness of the world. And actually, they've bypassed a lot of the grimness. They've been very decent for people usually playing these games. So that's been good to see. Now, I couldn't tell you which game is going to end first. Number one, the Warhammer 40,000 game is pretty brutal and lethal. We've danced on the edge of total party wipes a few times. On the other hand, the track record of the Dungeons & Dragons party is they've been skirting party wipes themselves. And we've already had one reset. We had kind of a change where we lost a player and picked up a player, and I decided that the old characters probably we should just reset with new characters. And because we're new to 5th edition, you know, it's only come out a little while ago, and this is the first campaign we've done on it, I thought it'd be nice to let them try some different character classes out so we can get a better feel for how the game works as a whole. It's been a pretty good experiment, honestly. So if either of those parties dies, everybody in it is dead or incapacitated out of the storyline, we will not continue those games. We will move on to something else. If they reach their end, the party overcomes their goal in Dungeons & Dragons, fighting off the big evil, saving the world probably, or we run to the end of the storyline for the Warhammer 40,000 game, which I have a defined beginning, middle, end. It does have an end to it. At some point, I'm going to be done telling the story, and I will put that game down. Any survivors will obviously go on to new, more possibly better things, but we will have told a complete story by that time. Then things get kind of interesting. First of all, I will take a break, possibly a month-long break. That would be 2 sessions for most months, where we'll play board games and card games instead. I've got so many new board games that I can't wait to try out and play. I just picked up a classic from the 80s called Keys to the Kingdom that I saw a YouTube video with some gameplay. And I was really impressed, and I got the game, and I can't wait to play it, and I can't wait to play with my friends. On the card game front, I've got fun games like Nuclear War and Munchkin that are low commitment, and I have just a host of different things that we can do for short one-shots. I think I might even ease myself in with a couple of sessions of Paranoia, which is a whimsical game where life is cheap because you have 6 clones, intentionally. You work for an insane computer that may kill you as well as help you, and it's an interesting dystopian future type game. We might play a few rounds of Car Wars, you know, which I have, and it's a fun little game. Another thing that is good for knocking off 2 nights. One night to build the cars, and the other one to blow each other up. Classic. But what I think I want to do next is I have a fantasy world. I have 2 fantasy worlds actually emerging in my head. One is my world of Moltra, which is a giant molten ball that the land masses in it are actually the backs of huge worms, WYRMS, dragon-like without the wings, who swim through the lava, and they absorb its magic, and that sustains them, but life grows on their back based on the psychic impression of the worm itself. So, you know, the worm that has elves in your typical fantasy setting is one that's very in touch with magic, and the world is its surface is very magical. Magical flora and fauna are everywhere. The elves are there, and they revere their worm that brings them all this magic and stuff. Whereas the one that spawned the orcs is actually the worm of industry, and the orcs are actually technologically gifted, where they have smoke belching factories and things, but they're still warlike. They still keep some of the traits of orcs. It's a world that I have expanded on, and it's the backdrop right now of the mega dungeon that I've created for my local hobby shop. I like to play in that world a bit. But on the other hand, I have an alternate, super high fantasy setting that my personal fiction is set in. With my short story that I've written, Necromancer's Dirge. It's a setting where the technology is about similar to ours, but everything took a magical spin. So if I set it in the world of, say, Dungeons and Dragons, then the different fantasy creatures are going to be incorporated into the world for the most part, but rather than being monsters, most of them are going to be incorporated or made safe by the super advanced magic that people come up with. I have an alternate magical system in mind too, because that's kind of an important thing in my world. Magic works a bit differently. In this world, you're either born with magic or you're not. It's nothing that you just pick up. The world is so magical that many people can pull off magical effects with a rhyme or a cant that they can learn. But for the most part, only wizards can do magic, and all wizards have 4 major traits. They have a... There's going to be some spoilers, but okay. They have a path, which is the style that their magic is expressed in. For example, Sigmund, the main character of Necromancer's Dirge, his magic is oral. He speaks and the magic happens. So he's a necromancer by path, which is the way, the style of magic that you are naturally attuned to. So he's a necromancer, and his tradition is oral. So if he sees ghosts, he can interact with them by talking. He pulls off magical effects by asking the spirits to do things for him. So other wizards, though, are forced by the society to learn to cast spells. They are basically indoctrinated so that magic only works when you wiggle your fingers and say the right words, and magic happens. And they're trained that that's the right way to do it, which codifies their magic and makes them, more predictable, more understandable. Doesn't work for everybody. And my fiction is about misfits in that society, of all the different branches. So then there's the power, there's your path, there's your demon, which all wizards have a what you might consider a familiar in some games, which is a creature that talks to you, guides you through your path. Their demon is basically a creature that only they can see, usually, that constantly tries to keep them alive and keep them using their magic and tempting them to take bigger and bigger gambles with more and more powerful magic. Because the final part of a wizard's, the package they get is their doom. If they ever exceed their magical capabilities and it all goes wrong, they turn into a monster, which is where many of the monsters come from. The more powerful the wizard, the bigger the monster. So, for example, war mages, when a very powerful war mage goes bad, they turn into a dragon. And that's one of the most feared things that can happen to a wizard, but many wizards kind of skirt that. A necromancer who meets his doom turns into some undead creature. And there's some mechanical differences and such. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but I might not even use Dungeons and Dragons for that. I've got the GURP system that I love and I've really been longing to play, and now I picked up Dungeon Fantasy, which is an abbreviated set of the rules for that, and I'm thinking about using that for my Necromancer's Dirge World. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. I've got time to worry about it, but it's something I'm thinking about. The other one would be actually finally getting out some playtesting on my Dice File game, the role-playing game that I created with my own mechanics and everything. I think it's ready to go. I like to tweak it a little bit more, probably, after some gameplay knocking off. But it's, I don't know. I like it as a system. I think it'll work quite well. So those are my plans. That's rather long range. Again, we're looking at probably more than a year out from either of those campaigns ending. But yeah, got some good stuff lined up. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Of course, if my players watch this, this is all subject to change. Especially if you give me input on what other things you might be interested in. So, if any of this sounds cool to you, comments are below. I read everything. I respond to everything. So, I encourage you to, yeah, feedback is great. Criticism I can deal with. And, yeah, if you enjoyed this or you thought this would be really cool and you want to tell me about it, I'd be happy to hear you. But I am OmnusI here in my lair, and that is my answer to the question. Thank you for joining me, and I hope that you stay tuned and come and visit me next time here at the Lair of OmnusI. Farewell.